Okay, well, hello, and thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is one of my very few full page scenes that I do. There's a very small percentage that I'll use a full letter size 8.5 by 11 piece, but I really wanted to play around with those northern lights, and I wanted to have a lot of space to apply them. I wanted to have kind of more of the curtainy type of things where I have some color coming from below, some darker tones into the mix. So I went with a full page scene. So the challenge of this month's Facebook group that they've established is kind of bold silhouettes. So I wanted to use my wools, and I've been trying to do. I did one yesterday where I've kind of established kind of a dramatic kind of scenario. And when I think of drama in scenes, one of the easiest ways to kind of introduce drama into a scene is through the use of what's happening in the sky. You know, dramatic skies, sunsets. I did lightning yesterday, and this is the northern light type of thing. It's an easy way to do something like that, you know, is potentially dramatic. You can make very serene and calm types of skyscapes and whatnot too. But when you start using kind of the brighter, kind of vibrant colors, you know, it kind of adds a sense of energy to a given composition. And I don't know, the Northern Light, Aurora Borealis type of application of inks is really fun to do. It's the same type of application. If I turn it this way, and this is all in blues, and this is the type of, you know, kind of streaky kind of thing that I do for water as well. So it's just kind of turned on in like that, and, you know, made it a vertical application, and it turns into, you know, your Northern Lights. So anyways, a really fun scene to do, and I would say that if you happen to watch it and sit through the whole thing, I wish I could give you a medal, but really fun to do, and kind of achieving these kind of glowing kind of pillars of light and whatnot. And I've gone back into the areas with some gel pens, and I've added little highlights and some stars in there. But the kind of the probably the visual landing point of the scene, I don't know. If it's not the wolves, it's probably those kind of, you know, like light pillars. So they're kind of competing for kind of the visual anchor point of the scene. So hopefully it creates a kind of a nice dynamic for the composition. And anyways, hope you like it. And if you choose to watch the video again, hope you enjoy it. Thanks again for tuning into the channel as always. Okay, let's see what we can do with a full-size piece of cardstock here. This is a 8.5 by 11 letter size, as they call it here in the US. And it's a size that I rarely work in, okay? I think I've done one lesson on, you know, on this YouTube channel in a full-size piece, but the idea of this piece is going to be drama and a lot of silhouettes. Okay, so I'm just going to stamp out my foundation for this piece, and it'll be focused around these wolves. I really love using these kind of strong silhouette animal shapes with the latest release of stamps, and it's for the purpose of drama. I'm finding that you can pretty much stamp just about anything you want in the background, and when you place these large silhouettes over the front of it, they really kind of play off of all the colors or textures and everything that you've kind of established in the background. Okay, this is a snowy image that I've stamped 2 times here. I've overlapped it, okay? When you stamp Stampscape stamps, you're supposed to overlap them so that you don't see the the gaps or something. You don't create gaps in between the imagery. They're meant to be merged together for seamless transitions between objects. And that's for the reason, for a couple of reasons. One reason, the biggest reason, so that they're easy to use and you don't have to fuss over them. Okay, but anyways, that has been established right there. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I have so many colors and inks that I'm going to bring into this scene. And it's going to be really, really saturated with ink here in the end. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some of my stronger silhouettes until after I've laid down my inks so that they don't smear upon the application of those inks. This one right here is kind of more of it's a lighter stamp. There's not so much surface area. It's more kind of dots and it's more delicate, okay? So, not a lot of ink is transferred, so if I'm running ink over it, this is already dry and I don't have to worry about puddling or something like that, where it's going to drag and smear some of my imagery. Okay, now I have a ton of area right in here, and this is going to be, it's supposed to depict an aurora borealis, or northern lights, as they're also known as, and therefore I am going to use a ton of ink, and I am going to use, I have my palette right here. I can always just use the top of a lid or something like that off of a stamp pad as well. But I do have these palettes. This one looks a little bit dirty here, actually. Looks like I have a lot of dirty palettes here. I don't know. I guess I never clean them out, because I can kind of reconstitute these inks that are on here. So sometimes I just leave them in there. Okay, now, alright, I've got everything here prepared except I'm missing my first ink, so let me pause this and grab that ink. Okay, I've grabbed a few reinkers actually. This is going to be in a green color scheme, so I've grabbed a blue. This is a Adirondacks Lights Aqua. It's a really, really light blue. I have a pale green and a light green here, but basically the range of greens that I'm going to work through are everything from light to dark, okay? You can use mementos or whatever. Now, remember, you don't have to do this on a full kind of page scene, too. I have a lot of kind of real estate, so to speak, to cover, so I just find that re-inkers are so much faster in terms of this application process when you're using so much ink than to be dabbing into a stamp pad for your applications. Boy, this one's on tight. I rarely have to go into my re-inkers because the pads are so juicy, but when it comes to kind of a large sheet like this, I just assume start off with something that's going to give me so much more coverage, okay? Now, when you take your inks, re-inkers, onto your applicator, you're basically turning your sponge applicator into a stamp pad on a stick, okay? There's going to be a lot of ink coming off of it, so kind of be conscientious about the amount of ink that you're applying on here. Now, this is what I'm going for. I'm going for this kind of northern light type of thing. I think they call it curtains, okay? That's one style of the northern lights. So the white of the paper is going to be important, so I'm not going to want to just cover this whole thing in, okay? I'm going to want to go for this kind of streakier application, all right? So I'm going like this, and kind of these northern lights types of things are, it's kind of like this, kind of these flares of light going up. Now we're not using light, but we're using contrast when we're doing stamp pieces, unless, I don't know, unless someone has some LEDs or something like that that they do kind of incorporate in with their projects, which is really cool to do, by the way. But otherwise, what we're doing is we're going to be defining light through the use of shadow or tone. One of the things that I usually don't do, I usually have my curtains kind of, it's this like whole glow coming from the horizon, but one of the things I want to do on this piece is I want to come into it and kind of make it a little bit more curtainy, you know, like this band of light kind of going through the sky. And let's see, I don't want 4 bands of light, I want kind of an odd number, so let me see if I can kind of alter this a little bit. We're working with a really light color right here in this blue, so right now, so it'll take on more of a green tinge though, but I don't have a kind of a really light green, so I'm going with this blue one because green, blue is a component of green, of course. So I can use this. I mean, you can use yellow, whatever, you know, or something like that. Okay, let me just go. I think I'm going to make this one more dominant here. Look at this like high curtain coming up here. I'm still working with a very light color, so there's still a lot of leeway that I can do. All right, that looks really ugly right now. In terms of my streaking, it'll improve, hopefully. I'm not worried about it, and I'm just kind of doing this loose, I mean very loose kind of thing here where I'm kind of trying to figure out, you know, this kind of this shape that I'm going to be establishing. Okay, something like that. I think I might want my flare to be a little bit more distinct, but this is the lightest color, so. Okay, now down here, one of the things I'm going to be adding into the scene are a row of trees back here, okay? So, around this snowy bank, oh, by the way, yeah, this is a snowy bank here. I can't remember the name. This is early morning. Like really early morning. I rarely stamp at this hour, it seems. But I'm really excited to get this this composition kind of underway. Alright, so I'm going to be bringing in this color because the color that's going to be established up here will be reflecting on the this is supposed to be like, this will end up being like a snowy frozen lake right here, and my wools will be running across this kind of frozen area. Who knows where it is? Somewhere where it snows and it's nice and cold during the winter, and where you can see the northern lights. Not that it has to be anywhere specific, it could just be a location for the sake of drama. Okay. Alright, now this is really, really slippery. Just about any ink that you go with, except for Marvy, okay, which I will be using on this, has a really thick consistency to it. It's the, what do you call it, the, okay, oh my gosh, I'm so non-articulate right now. The viscosity of the ink is very, very thick, okay? Now this is glossy paper that I'm working on, remember? Glossy cardstock, not glossy photo paper. Photo paper is going to be a lot more absorbent, and the feeling of it is going to be different when you're applying it, so. This ink, when I'm applying it like this, I'm not just doing it for color, I'm doing it for kind of saturation. In terms of sitting on the pulp of the, you know, the surface of the paper, it's slowly absorbing into the paper, and it's kind of saturating your pulp Just a little bit. I mean, it's not completely soaked through or something like that, but it is moist to the touch here. So that when I go on with my incrementally darker and darker colors, these ones will blend in just fine. And I don't have to worry about, getting these like oval shapes everywhere, because when I do it on over the top of, kind of a moist piece of paper like that, it just blends out perfectly fine and easy, okay? That's, when using kind of sponge applicators, that's one of the biggest comments that I get from people that are having a difficult time with it. They don't put enough ink down, so when they get to their darker colors, they say, I can't get rid of that shape of the applicator. But one of the, the easiest things to do is to get enough of that base coat down, okay? So that when you do get into your darker tones, see that? It just, it will blend out just fine. It's like, imagine putting your some ink or something like that down on a wet piece of glass or something like that. Maybe not that moist. Get a piece of hair out of there. But it is, it makes the process super easy to do. In terms of your blending process, sometimes I get it almost too thick and it's, the inks aren't applying because it's so wet, and the paper isn't accepting any of that new color because it is so wet. So you have to be a little bit conscious of that too. But, we are talking about a very large piece of paper, so as far as, card making goes, I don't know, this one's going to be a card here, it's too big, but I guess it could be. I don't have a lot of 12 by 12 paper, though, to mat something like this, though. Like all of you might have in your paper collection, but most of my matting paper is 8.5 by 11, so. I stamped this one for scene stamping, for scene stamping's sake. Okay, now this, if I didn't say, is Pear Tart. It's a very light color, but I have a lot of the blue from the previous color still on my tip here, so it's kind of mixing with that. Okay, here's a Memento Bamboo Leaves. It's a little bit darker. I'm just kind of working incrementally darker as I go through this. Okay. And do we still see our kind of, our curtains there? Let me establish them a little bit more. I was going to go with an odd number of curtains, but I'm going to try to go for this kind of more dominant center one right in here. And I'll go for smaller ones off to the side. See, it's kind of starting to develop right there. You can hardly see it, I know, but that's kind of the idea. When you run analogous colors together next to each other, or right on top of each other, like in this case, analogous colors are colors that are right next to each other, like on the spectrum, or like say color wheel, like so like a blue and a green. When you run those next to each other, visually it creates a color glow, and that's what we want our aurora borealis or northern lights to be, to have the illusion of some glowing light in the sky. Same thing down here. I want there to be kind of a reflected light illusion down here. And I say illusion because we're not working with light, we're just working with contrast. So the darker I make a certain area, the more the lighter areas are going to seem by contrast. You can see it kind of starting to develop here. See, when I'm coming from the top, I flip my paper around like this. Okay, because this is the natural motion of my hand. It's just much more comfortable. If I can get darker using an existing color, then I add more, okay? So you can get darker using this one. Okay, but as far as the angle, then when I'm coming from this side, I flip my card around so I can stay with that same kind of motion like that. A lot of times I'm using the side of my applicator, okay, to get these kind of streakier looks. You know, I can get it on the edge of this, so a lot of those kind of more edge-oriented, but on this one, maybe a little bit less so. I am using the full thing, the full pad, a lot of it, because the sheer amount of ink that I want to and need to apply on such a large surface here, relatively large, again. Starting to look more curtainy, right? Because of those streaks that are in there. It's like these fingers of light kind of reaching up. Okay, all right. That's those two colors. Now, you definitely don't have to just go with, the colors that I'm using. If you have, let's say you don't have a large range of green values, you can always just use a light blue, medium blue, dark blue, and then when you run a green into it, it will look green because these colors are transparent, so the colors that you're applying into your pieces will, if not physically merge, they'll optically merge. It's like if I had two transparencies, a yellow one and a blue one, if I put them together and held them up to the light, it would look green, right? And that's what these transparent inks will be doing. Okay, this is a yellow-green. So if you just have the kind of the basics of color blends down, that yellow and blue mixed to form green, then any kind of yellowish or greenish tinge added to blue will form that green tinge, or a blue-green. Depends how dominant your certain particular colors are, but pinks and blues for purples, and violets, reds and yellows for oranges, sorry. Okay. This is a very yellow-greenish tinged color. And it is called yellow-green. I didn't even use this color for a while because it was kind of in the, kind of secondary release of Marvy Matchables by the company. But, I don't know, I kind of worked it into the repertoire, color repertoire. I used to travel around with about 24 pads for all my workshops, and everyone had a set, in the class, unless I was teaching a class of like 30, then, two people had to share a set, but I had 20 sets of ink pads. And the stackability of them like that, you can get, 24 of them, and 3 stacks of 8, and a very small space on a table. So, but alas, Marvy discontinued their Marvy Matchable pads. They still have the re-inkers though, so you can always go with the re-inker version. Which, by the way, I almost forgot that I had those re-inkers over there. See, it's starting to develop though. Okay, now let me see if I can remember which one's which. Okay, one of these puddles is a pale green, one of them's a light green. I think this is the pale green right here, but if it isn't, no big deal. Okay, pretty dark, isn't it? Relatively speaking, it's still going to be one of the lighter values, though. But there's the benefit of the raincoat; it really gives you a lot of coverage. So that being said, when you're applying a large amount of ink, okay, to something, kind of be careful, because one of the things that we're trying to establish on here are these beams of light, and it's easy to kind of eradicate them, you know, because there's so much ink on your tip. It's, you know, you don't want to lose that which you're trying to, you know, conserve or retain. Okay. All right, flip it around. Marvy colors are very bright. Okay, I like using them in conjunction with, you know, your Memento and Distress inks. I love the tones of the Distress inks. You know, the earthy hue. You know, of that curated kind of set. You know, of a type of colors. But I do like the brightness of the Marvies, so you don't have to, you know, some people say, well, what type of ink pad do you have to use? You know, it's not so much a one or the other type of thing. I use all kinds of inks, you know, in conjunction with one another, or in combinations. I use the ones, you know, that whatever brand of ink or whatever color of ink for their strengths. Some inks are dull, okay? Not dull in terms of interest, though, but dull in terms of their intensity, and I like having dull in conjunction with intense, so that I have a nice wide range of that property of color. You know, there's color, there's value, light and dark of it, intensity is bright and dull, temperature is warm and cool, and then you have hue. What color is it? So I don't know, mix and match. You know, a lot of you probably have your pads kind of arranged by brand, but all you have to do is kind of grab them in terms of value when you're doing this type of exercise. Okay, this is a light green. It's this one. Now this light green is really, really bright, and it's if you like really bright colors and you like green, it's a pretty good one to go with, or to have in your collection. And see, you can just go with the unless you're going to be stamping something in this color, then you can just go with the you don't have to have a blank pad for it. You can just use the re-inker and get the benefit of that color. Because like I said, they don't sell the dedicated pads anymore, they just sell blank pads. I do happen to like the Marvy Black, though, so if I didn't have the dedicated pad, and one of these days I won't, because my pad will kind of disintegrate after a while. 20 years, but mine's kind of getting up there in age. I will have to buy a new pad. And it's nice to have the new fabric and everything like that, too, but look at those curtains starting to develop. Those pillars of light. Okay, let's run this down in my snowy bank here. What I'm doing to see is I'm not having to be too, careful about my placement of color down here, but I do want to retain some of the light, like it's snow reflecting some of that light from the Aurora Borealis. Okay. Now we're still, even though I have used quite a bit of ink here, and colors, different colors, I am still in a fairly light spectrum or value scale. This green, this light green, I mean, that's what it's called. It's called light green, so it's not very dark at this point in time yet, but what I'm going for is richness and whatnot. And when I move up into my darker tones, okay, I won't be applying so much of it, okay? You use more of your lighter colors when doing this type of process right here. The lighter colors get more coverage. And then as you move up into your darker tones, you just use less and less. Alright, so we're starting to see that kind of that cool characteristic of the Northern Lights. Okay, let's see. Let's try a jungle green. We can go to like the cottage ivy or something like that. Or, like I said, we can go with blue or whatnot. Okay, so every time you kind of apply a new color, just gauge it, figure out how dark is it, but more importantly, how dark is it over what you've already added. Okay, this is the jungle green, just on a blank piece of paper, and here it is over the top of these other ones. Okay, this paper is getting fairly, moist, so it's not applying as fast. Okay, but it is getting a little bit darker though. Okay, but it kind of gives you kind of an indication of the consistency of the surface right now, about how much, or maybe more accurately, how little of this ink is actually transferring to the paper. Okay, now let me go a little bit. Here's where I'm going to start kind of manipulating things further. Okay, I want this. I'm going to bring this in, I think, a little bit like this. Okay, just to kind of frame things off. So I'm going darker on the outside edges there. Okay, coming up like this. Okay, and one of the things I like to do is I like to kind of create a little bit of a transition. I don't want it to just go solid dark and then white. I want it to kind of be darker in the middle of these right here, and then as it moves towards that light, it kind of transitions a little bit lighter. So it's like with this kind of pillar of darkness right here, the center of it is going to be darker, so that it transitions. Okay, and maybe I'll start using more of the edge of the applicator to get less coverage, with each kind of stroke here. Okay, same thing up here. I'll kind of go more kind of center applied. For variation, I'm kind of taking this one down a little bit farther, or a lot farther. See, when you do these real kind of streaky kind of marks, it looks like things look like they're hanging more, like curtains or something like that. So in other words, you don't have to do it so kind of smooth, okay? It's better if it's a little bit more, kind of that type of mark. Okay, let's hit the shadows down here. Kind of leaving my areas down here, kind of like a spotlight for my wolves to come. Okay. The consistency of the different brands of inks is pretty apparent. The Marvy ones are thinner in viscosity and they penetrate more. Things like Memento, all the Ranger inks, Distress and whatnot, they're thicker. So, you know, that really comes into play in this type of application process. One of the things that you'll start running into is that aspect of, you know, kind of that application and it kind of wiping off. So the motion that you have to kind of start doing a little bit more of if you're using all kind of thicker styles of ink, which are most of them, is you might have to kind of start dabbing on like this and using this kind of motion, then just kind of slightly drag it. Don't drag too much, otherwise you're going to be removing the ink. But kind of just dabbing on, letting it kind of set up a little bit, and then just kind of lightly going over it like that so that you're not removing so much of that ink. Alright, and this is Cottage Ivy. It's a fairly dark color, but again, when applied over the top of these inks right here, all the other saturations of ink, it might not apply so fast, okay, if you've gone through 3 or 4 colors so far. I don't know what time of year the northern lights are kind of out in force, you know, the strongest or the most visible time, I'm guessing winter. But I have never seen them in person, and I do want to one of these days. I didn't even hear about them, I think, until after high school. I was looking through a magazine, like a travel magazine, and I saw this gigantic, you know, like full-page spread of this Northern Lights. I was wondering if it was real, like a real photo, if it was some kind of like photoshopped or some, not photoshopped, it would have been airbrushed back in the day, you know, if there was kind of some alteration to some piece, but I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd never heard of it either. Okay. I was reading this travel article. I think it's this place in, I'm sure it might, you know, these types of things might be in more countries, but I think it was in Sweden where you can go and they have these kind of like pods, you know, like overnight pods, but in these pods they have this kind of clear, probably plexiglass roofs, you know, where you can watch the northern lights from the comfort of your bed. These pods are fairly small, so it's not like a, you know, big room, but you know, that you stay in them overnight and you can watch the northern lights right from the comfort of your bed. But I don't know, what a cool idea or concept. Okay, you can kind of see things coming around a little bit more and more with each color, huh? Now, here's the thing. I think things look pretty good in terms of the color scheme right here. But to me, I find that just going with green sometimes I find a little bit limiting in terms of the, I don't know, the color scheme of it. So one of the things I like to do is I like to give, what I found is I like to introduce kind of more earthy kind of color scheme to it. So I like to use browns over the tops of these greens, and then before I kind of, run it into black. Now I can probably go a little bit darker with this green right here, but I'm going to switch tips here, and now I'm going to introduce something like a walnut stain. Walnut stain's a nice distress ink. It's a nice warm tone, and it's a different hue than this green right here, but I do like it in terms of the I don't know, just the what it brings to the table in terms of oh, I don't know. It kind of mellows out the those kind of real super hot greens. One of the things that I'm noticing here is distress inks are usually really thick. Okay, this one is kind of thinner. I'm finding it's really applying quickly. In other words, it's kind of real dry to the touch for some reason. I don't know why. So I am going to use it though, and I'm going to use it to darken my darkest areas. Okay. So come up from the bottom. Any kind of distress inks though, those kind of, earthy colors. Now down here I'm going to have some trees, but it's not bad to have this kind of color established behind my trees. Okay, let me use the side of this one, get those kind of streakier touches in here. I'm looking at this and kind of analyzing it now. I think I want to go even brighter with, let me use more of this light green in here. This light green is a really, really bright color. I like what I see, but I want to introduce a brighter tint, because I'm going to be overlapping this with more tones, so I want that underside, the under, what will be base coats to really glow. Okay, see that? See how much brighter that is right there? Kind of really warms it up, doesn't it? Look how vivid that is. These pieces too, when they dry, they will take on kind of more of a dull kind of look to them, but if you spray them with a spray sealant, okay, an acrylic sealant, you will get a nice, bright, kind of freshly stamped finish to your pieces. The saturations and glow will kind of be reinvigorated, if not heightened, by the use of that acrylic spray. Okay, there we go. Now let me use this kind of the drier version of this. Okay, I've kind of wiped off a lot on there. Like there was too much white on there too, I think, you know, so I've come into it a little bit more with the this light value. Okay, all right. Let's move into green. This is just called green. It's Marvy number 4, and it's just green. It's kind of like your Christmas green. It's not there's not too much yellow. It's more of a kind of a neutral green. Ooh, it sure is bright though, isn't it though? I do have a lot of color in my pad because I, what was it? Maybe 2 months ago, was it? At the Carson show. Before I had back-to-back weekends of conventions. I haven't done that in years. But I really re-inked my pads. But the darker tones I usually don't apply so much. I don't do full-size scenes, you know, it shows either, but I don't know, I probably re-ink too much. When I get into these darker tones, they usually don't go for so much coverage. You know, it's usually kind of more something, a color that you use kind of in the perimeter. You know, that, like that dark green, that's all I needed. Up there. It's coming from below. Starting to take on. I mean, this Aurora Borealis is supposed to kind of happen in, you know, the nighttime, right? So we do want to make this fairly dark. Remember to keep your lighter areas established. Don't tone them all out when you get to your darker colors, okay? Kind of show. You're doing a little bit more of a selective application of it. Sometimes when people are doing this technique of color layering, sponging, okay, a lot of times what happens is they have light, but then when they move into their darker colors, that's when they lose it sometimes because they fill in everything, okay, they go a little bit too much. Where the lighting is really about selective applications with your darker tones, okay, so kind of retaining some of that light just means simply staying away from it with your darker colors. But I don't know, when people kind of lose their lights or whatnot with any given piece, I tend to think that's fine when they're kind of learning how to do this, you know, defining light through the use of shadow, because I'd rather them use too much ink and just, you know, as an example of you know, something to consider the next time they do it, than to be so kind of careful about their placement where they don't achieve the saturations that a lot of ink provides. So I'd rather, you know, them just kind of apply too much than too little. Otherwise the scenes come out a little bit more kind of anemic, you know, from the lack of enough ink laid down. So be very generous with your inks, especially your darker tone, your lighter tones, your base coats, okay? Get a lot of that ink down, and then it makes this entire process very easy. When I move into my darker tones now, say if I use the worst technique possible, like going like that, right? It's a big shape, it just blends out, right? So that's, you know, you don't want to do that with your, you know, if you didn't have the kind of all these other colors already laid down. And it's not as if this paper is like soaking wet to the touch or something like that, but the pulp is kind of super saturated with ink, okay? So, I mean, I am getting a little bit of ink on my tips, you know, fingertips, like, but if I go like that, there's nothing, you know, on there. I guess there is on a microscopic level, but, you know, I'm not, this, you know, the paper isn't dripping or something like that with ink. It's starting to kind of take on more of that kind of Northern Lights look, isn't it? Now remember, if I was doing this on a, you know, a quarter-page standard card size, this would have been much faster, but I really wanted to get a lot of those curtains in there for the sake of this kind of dramatic monthly challenge. I don't think I might have. I have another lesson too, where I've done this before in lesson form, using these colors here. It'll be a slightly different composition though, but I really wanted to get a lot of that up there for the sake of that drama or dramatic type of theme. Get a little bit more of a kind of shadows in my snowbank here. There's going to be some shadows down here. Got that top ridge where it transitions into the trees that I'll be putting up there. I don't know if you can hear that, but there seems to be a dove right outside the window. Okay. Kind of see where this bank meets the frozen kind of water. I'm putting an extra shadow down there. See that right there? And then I'll kind of transition it off a little bit from dark. Doing an edge like that, and I'll just kind of taper it off a little bit like that, so that we have something like that. Okay, so it's really dark right around the edge, and then I kind of taper it down. I'm going to do the same thing up here in the sky. You can kind of go darker down below, kind of taper it off like that. Use a real light touch, don't scrub back and forth. Your tips will last you not forever, but you know, in terms of kind of an applicator like this, you know, seemingly forever, they could last 15 years if kind of taken care of. You don't have to be delicate with them though, that's for sure. But just kind of don't scrub back and forth. I have a video on the do's and don'ts of the stylus tool in terms of this type of application process. A lot of times when people don't feel that they're getting enough ink applied, what they do is they start scrubbing it hard back and forth, and that's not what you want to do with your foam tips like that. They'll tear instantly. I mean, it's not going to tear, like that, but if you're really scrubbing it on a dry piece of paper. All right, that green served us very, very well. I don't know, I got a lot more coverage than I was anticipating with that given color, being that it's fairly dark. Let me see, let me add a little bit more. It's super bright, too. You never know. I mean, see, I've run a lot more green into this than I have before doing this type of color scheme and Northern Light type of application. So I'm seeing things that I haven't seen before, in terms of this color over the top of those other colors like the Memento colors and all that. All right, so here's this brown now. This is just the Marvy brown. Let me try that. Ooh, look how dark that is. Believe me, that's not a really... Okay, that has the green in it. Maybe that's still the green, probably. Boy, that green sure got dark with a little bit of that brown in combination. Okay. Love this brown, though. I use this brown in things like sunsets and kind of that color scheme, too, because that color scheme can get like super hot with oranges and yellows and brilliant yellows and I don't know, whatever, pinks. And this brown really kind of mellows things out. I think the walnut would probably do that as well in the distress line. Okay. Follow suit, kind of add that into your shadows again. Now, let me see if my bottle green can work. This bottle green, this pad right here is ancient, and it's starting to degrade. You can see kind of where the foam of it is kind of collapsing. So it's, when I dab into it, it's kind of smashing, but it's not good for making impressions anymore because of that pad consistency, but it is fine for just inking up and applying like that. Bottle green is one of the darkest greens that I've seen on the market in terms of ink pads, ink colors. And in scenic stamping, browns, blues, greens, they tend to have a lot of usage, with those colors. So I like having a nice full range. So I really like having a really dark green, a dark blue, dark brown. And the Marvy is the darkest that I've seen so far. The Prussian blue from Marvy, very, very dark. And brown, dark brown, I don't know, there might be a darker one on the market, I'm not sure, than the dark brown Marvy. But the dark brown Marvy, is pretty dark. Ooh, look how much darker we can get with that. When you're tapping it like that, you're kind of building up little beads of dark ink on each other, you know, and if you don't hit it too hard, then it'll keep building up. If you go too hard, you'll probably kind of, you know, be absorbing the ink back into the sponge like that as opposed to applying it. Okay, let's go dark on the upper right and left corners. This is where you start really seeing the intensity of the piece coming out of the color scheme that you've kind of established. Okay. Let's see what happens with the dark brown. Did I already use that? I can't even remember. Yeah, I don't know if I did, because that looks pretty dark. Over the top of the bottle green. One of the combinations that I used to find was the darkest in the stamping world was I couldn't find a really great black pad. This is back in the day, almost before stamp pads. In fact, I think it was. Everyone was using pens, you know, that stamped, because stamp pads, raised die-based pads, just weren't out there. You know, because the ink would leak out of the pad. They hadn't kind of figured out that going with a kind of a thicker viscosity of ink, you know, would remain in a raised pad. With Marvy, they just went with a very dense foam to hold that ink, so that, you know, when you go like that, it wouldn't just kind of pour out of there. The pads, or the types of, like, Marvy Black didn't seem to be, it was more like a 90% gray to me than true black. So one of the colors that I like to use, or color combinations, was that bottle green here. Bottle green and violet, like these two colors right here. If you combine them together on a stamp, and then you stamped them out, they would typically be darker than any black that I saw out there. It's kind of a hassle, but I don't know. So that's what we had to work with. So I would often have people ink up their stamps with that combination if they wanted a really dark black, or I don't know, dark hue. It didn't look like violet or green, you know, when you mix them two. It just was a very, very dark hue. And I thought much closer to a true black than any black that I saw. Now the Marvy black in pad form is, I don't know, it's pretty black. And I thought the closest to true black until I compared it to VersaFine. I thought, oh, okay, that VersaFine is much, much darker than Marvy black. Of course, they're two different things. So one's VersaFine's pigment, and the Marvies are dye-based. Okay, so just adding a lot more of this brown. It doesn't read as brown over the tops of all that dark green, but it is getting darker, though. You can probably use some of that violet in there if you want. It's not going to look violet, I don't think. I haven't done that in a while. Let me just try it out of curiosity. Let's see if it looks darker. I haven't done this combination in years. I don't know if it's darker or not. Yeah, it's pretty dark. I plan on doing black out there anyway, so. That's not too bad though. That looks pretty good. Let's see if I can get some of that in there. And like I said, this is, pure violet. Well, I had some of that brown on there before, but see, it just reads as a darker hue because these are transparent colors, so, there it is right there. It almost looks blue with all these other colors kind of mixed into it. Look at that deep saturation though. Okay. Before I go to black, I'm going to introduce another hue into the mix, and that's this Caribbean blue. I pulled this out. I really like this blue. Not that I want things blue, but it's a really nice color. It's a really kind of bright, light blue. See that right there? It's kind of changing a little bit. See that right there? That tinge of kind of a different color is kind of nice. Let's come over here too on this side. Kind of putting some into that lighter curtain area. We bring some of that into this reflective area down here, reflective of kind of the sky, or what's going on up in the sky. I feel like the paper, I don't know, it's very subtle, but I feel like this paper is heavier from the use of all those things. I guess it would make sense if you kind of took a piece of paper and you soaked it in water, that it would be heavier. Okay, I have that Prussian blue here. Let me see if that's a really, really dark color. Okay. Okay, here we go. I don't know, it's pretty dark up there already. I don't know if this is influencing it or not. Seems to be, kind of. Yeah, I think it is getting, that is a darker tone than anything on there. Okay, be careful now. Retain your curtain areas. I'm kind of saying that to myself as much as telling you, because this is so dark. I'm kind of using the side of this too. I mean, going for the kind of more of those narrow kind of streaks. Yeah, that did get darker. You can use black too. I mean, I'm going to go to black. I know a lot of you aren't going to have this Prussian blue. If you've been collecting ink pads over the years, denim is a fantastic one, or like eggplant in the Adirondack range of inks. Just anything really dark. So really, you know, if you've been using other types of brands, you haven't pulled out your Adirondacks in a while, maybe utilize those. There's a lot of dark tones and that range of inks that are really fantastic. All right. Let's go with black here. Assessing, is it darker or not? One of the things that's going through my mind right now is I'm not sure if I'm going to use the VersaFine or the Marvy Black for my trees that I'm going to introduce into this mix. I might want them a little bit lighter than, you know, true black. So I might go with a Marvy. Okay, but I think it is time, finally, to get to those trees. And the rest of the imagery, really. God, that is a big, big area to fill in. Kind of a big change from a white piece of paper, isn't it? All right. Pines and rocks. So, we get a nice tree line in there. All right. Decisions. All right, I'm going to stamp this in the Marvy Black. I might go with two versions of it. I might go with Marvy Black and VersaFine to create a little bit of a kind of spatial depth. I'm not sure if I want to do that yet or not. Maybe. All right, my mask. I don't know if that one's very good. Let me see. That one's a bit straight there. That's okay. This one's a little bit too jagged for me. Paper towels have kind of a grain to it, so if you rip them one way, they'll give you kind of a more straight line. If you rip them the other way, those fibers will give you more of that jagged type of look. All right. I'll go about like so. Have some of your snowbanks showing there. And I'm not going to stamp out those rocks, or if I do, it's going to be a small portion of them. I'll go a little bit lower here, because I want to go for another impression of them. I don't know, there'll probably be about 4 impressions of this, and, you know, with varying, I'll vary the portions that I use of it. Okay, I'm giving a little bit of extra pressure down here where that mask is, because even though paper towels are very thin, relatively thin, it's still a ridge that I have to stamp off of, so I don't want to get a big space in between that mask and the surface of the paper. Okay. Oops. I didn't stamp it hard enough right in here, and I just noticed there's a little bit of a depression right here, which is why that didn't stamp out right there. So I should have used a little bit more pressure, but no big deal. I'll show you what I'm just going to do. I thought, what the heck? Beauty of scenic. Now, if I was using a stamp positioner, I could have hit it again, but we're just going to layer more imagery in here like so, and just fill that in. Okay, what happened was there was a little thing underneath my paper there. I didn't notice it when I was doing all that streaking, but okay, so I filled in right there, and then you just take it again, and I could fill in right there. All right, So there we have that. So much for that. All right. Just as I was talking about using plenty of pressure there. Okay. And let's go over here. And I tell you what, I'm going to go over here, and I think I'm going to go with this one. And maybe we will use the VersaFine for a stronger black on the perimeter. So it looks like there's a little bit of kind of visual depth in terms of using those values. Okay. Let's go about right here. All right, let's use the VersaFine. VersaFine is a pigment ink, so when I lay this VersaFine down, that's it as far as laying anything over the top of it. So pigment inks sit on the surface of your paper, where dye-based inks stain your paper, so they're more integrated in with the, the paper itself. So, that being said, really make sure that you have what you want. And see this, I'm overlapping my previous impression too. So I'll go about like so. Okay. And I think one more impression should do it. Go over here. Yeah, I'll go about like that. I'm kind of changing the height of it slightly with each impression so that it doesn't look like the same thing, just used over and over and over. Okay. So we have a nice bank of trees right here. I want to change some things with some height here, or alter it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in kind of your dead tree too. Let's see, which one do I want to go with? Maybe this one right here. This one I don't want to go too much higher. I guess that could be a foreground element, but I think I like the size of this one a little bit more. You can also use a smaller portion of this. I can also, go like that. But this one seems to match kind of the width of these trees a little bit more, like an older one amongst that grove there. Okay, let's see. All right. I have a decent selection of blocks here with my tack and peel on it, but sometimes I wish I had a little bit more of a narrow run like that for some of my kind of more elongated images. Okay, let's do this one. Do I do it in the Marvy or do I do it in the VersaFine? I think I'm going to opt for the Marvy, and I'll kind of set this amongst those trees as opposed to being kind of the darker versifying, where it's kind of more up front. The darker something is, typically it'll often look as though it's closer to us. Okay, now, so if I'm going to put this amongst those trees in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off the bottom of this, okay? And I'm going about maybe 1.5 inches up like that, where I'm removing quite a bit, and especially at the bottom, so it's going from kind of drier, a little bit less dry, to wet up here, okay? And that should transition into those trees really nice. I did a couple lessons on that recently, talking about gradations and value to create light and depth. Okay. Okay, so we have that tree right back in there. And tell you what, I like that. It took me a while to come up with these kind of more bony trees like that, but I thought it filled out like a forest more, kind of a more realistic type of depiction with kind of aged trees in there and dead ones amongst the living. I don't think you can make it look like a dead forest if all you stamp are these, but kind of it's kind of more of a, I don't know, kind of realistic ecosystem or whatnot with the use of these. And sometimes it makes the living ones seem even whatever livelier by having the dead one amongst them. Okay, doing the same thing down here, kind of wiping off the bottom pretty good, and less as it moves up here. I'm going about midway. And we'll put another one back in here somewhere. How about maybe over here? I'll put another one over here, I think. Yeah, there's so many different places I think it would look good. I don't know if I want to go straight right in the middle there. Probably not. But let me see. I might do a few impressions with this one. A smaller one, kind of in the distance. So remember, take off quite a bit, and then as you move up, kind of I'm removing a little bit less, okay? But a pretty decent amount off the bottom. Maybe I'll mask off this. Be careful around your versifying impressions. They're very wet still, I'm sure. If you've used that, you might have stamped all yours in dye-based inks. Yeah, something like that. Kind of it enhances that tree line, doesn't it? Do I want to go for one more? I'm not sure. I was looking right in there. I thought it would look good. Oh, I tell you what. Let's do it like this. Let's take it up, ink it up, and blot it off, okay? Just like we did in that stamp along, the last 3 lessons. I stamped it off first, so that when I stamp this out, it will stamp out lighter, and hopefully it stamps out lighter. And hopefully it looks like it's farther off in the distance, okay? Actually, it looks really good, like that. I don't want to overdo that, but that looks really good. So blot it off first. And blot it off the bottom here. So I did get that one in, but it's much lighter, so I don't know, it's a way to introduce something in there. It doesn't have to be in, like, in the darkest version of it. Okay. Okay, and one in the distance over here. I can do this with the pine trees as well. Maybe I will. Okay, let's see. Let me grab a single pine stamp, as I have it right here on my table. I don't see it. Let me grab it. Okay, here's the single pine right here. I don't want a large portion of it. I'm just going to use the top of it. And we'll blot it off. Okay, and then taper it. Okay, so it's right from here up, but I'm really removing off the, I don't know, most of the ink off the bottom portion of it. And let's see where this could go. Maybe back in here. It's like back in the mist. Wolves in the Mist. I think that was the name of the movie, wasn't it? Okay, going a little bit more, blotting off. I wasn't even thinking about doing this before, but you never know what kind of comes up, you know, during the process. Okay, I'm going to be stamping this over that VersaFine, which is still wet, so I need to be careful about that. Don't put too much pressure, or I'm going over the VersaFine. Okay, but you see how that looks right in there? It's more full now, doesn't it? Isn't it? I was going to say, doesn't it look like, you know? But, okay. Blot off. Took off a pretty good amount that time. Boy, that sure helped, I think. It's so much more full now. Where should I put it? Maybe right in here? Another one. Alright, so value. So I learned from my own lessons. Recent lessons. So it's fresh in my mind. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have thought to do that with those kind of lighter impressions in there. I think it looks pretty good, though. You kind of just filled that out a little bit more. So that kind of missing thing in there kind of triggered my notion to kind of fill it in a little bit more. Not that I would try to do that again, but, you know, that little area down there. But nevertheless, you know, see what happens, and I don't know, just kind of make it work for you. Okay, now I'm going to add some shadows down around this area now that the trees are kind of already in place, and I'll try to anchor that tree row a little bit more with some additional shading. If this area right here is backlit, then maybe the trees, in other words, are casting, you know, a bit of a shadow down here. And again, I have to really kind of be careful about the pigment ink impressions, because that pigment ink is really just sitting right on the surface of the paper right now. It's very wet. So if I tap over it, it's going to be smearing those images as well. It'll kind of move the ink. You don't have to wait forever for it to dry. The VersaFine dries on glossy in good time. Some of the pigment inks out there will not. They'll take forever to dry. But the VersaFine sets up pretty good over the, maybe a day or so, overnight. If you are in a kind of more arid location, then they'll dry faster. Okay, now one of the things I brought over too was kind of some little foliage types of things, kind of winter ones. Let's see. I thought I had a smaller block somewhere. Oh, here we go. No, wait. This one would fit that. Okay, I guess it does fit that. Kind of hangs off a little bit, but close enough. Okay, so these little things like this can, I don't know, introduce some nice texture into a given space. I do have some of these textures drawn into that snowy bank already, but this is just a way to go back in here and add some additional texture where I think it could probably use it. Okay, just stamp partial. So it just kind of gives it a little bit more texture. It's like some kind of like a leafless bush during the winter time. It's lost its foliage. Okay, that's me tapping off the ink, my cleaning process. Okay, let's add a little bit more texture. Kind of have these rocks in here. Let's add a few more rocks in here. This is looking really kind of, yeah, it's okay, but it's looking a little bare to me. So we'll carry out some additional textures in the forms of some additional rocks. It doesn't have to be put down there, but it just kind of, I think it adds to the overall kind of a textural scheme of the piece. There's the tiny rocks, and here's the tiny rocks. Tiny rock small, smaller version of it. it's kind of looking a little more full down here, I think, you know, doing these little extra textures. They're kind of, you know, they're very small elements, but kind of collectively they can add to that, I don't know, this overall kind of textural richness. I don't know, kind of it adds to the space of the piece, I guess. Okay, now we've got a lot of coloring in here. Do we want to add more? I guess we've gone this far. Why not add a little bit more, or take it a little one step further? Going with my green color scheme. This one's probably going to be a little bit too dark for that. These are just Marble de Plume alcohol pens. Here's a pale green shuttle art alcohol, just whatever brand of alcohol inks you're using. You have to be careful. Some of this, they will not mix with your dye-based inks, all right? But if your dye-based inks are wet, you know, and there's a puddle of it, it will kind of drag that out. Now, I'm not going to color anything where I have that pigment ink on there. The pigment ink will kind of drag and smear, so I have to kind of be careful about that. But this is an opportunity for me to add a little bit of shading to certain things. See these rocks in here? I can kind of add a little bit of a shadow around it, or I can color that rock in, touch. This won't show up where the green behind it is darker than it, but where it's lighter it will show up, or should. These rocks down here, just kind of adding a little bit of a shadow to it. Sometimes people associate shadows with being black or something like that, or gray, which, you know, if you're working in a black and white piece, they would be, but oftentimes shadows just are kind of deeper versions of the color that you're blocking out the light from. So, in other words, something like this pad right here, you can see, you know, the different variations of blue. The shadows of this blue pad here, case, is not black, it's just a darker version of blue, and the illuminated parts are the parts that are reflecting more light. Okay? So, with this color scheme being all green, I'm just going into the area and making my shadows a darker green. Okay? Now, some areas where it's a darker green, this light green isn't casting, you know, isn't creating a shadow. So I need to go with the darker green in those darker areas. Or like right around this ridge, you know, this, not ridge, but this water line, I can kind of add some shading to it with the use of a pen. See, right along here, just kind of going in, kind of filling that area out. The alcohol inks will kind of dry to this kind of shiny sheen to it, which doesn't necessarily look good against that dye-based applications, okay? Because it kind of stands out. But when you spray this with an acrylic spray, it'll kind of unify everything, and it won't look kind of different in terms of the textures. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'll spray this one, I'll bring it back in, do a little before and after. Okay, so I'm able to get in some of these shadow areas a little bit easier with this pen, okay, in much more detailed areas than I would with you know, kind of a sponging method. Alright, is it time for my subject matter? I also have some other stamps too that I was considering, you know. Too big. Alright. I can have it kind of coming from this way. Something really close to us, you know. against really far. Maybe I'll just go with something a little bit smaller. Let's go with this bush right here. It's kind of the big brother of that smaller twig, element that I added in there. All right, this doesn't quite fit this block right here. I have to go quite a bit larger here. What I want a little bit more kind of depth in the seam, so. Let's just go with the VersaFine. And I say it that way because I'm going to have to kind of avoid touching this while I do any additional elements or whatever techniques on this. So that kind of brings the depth of that area out a little bit. Alright, gosh, I need room on this table area, working at such a large scale here. Okay, come up with another one over here. Some of those branches coming in from the side. Something like that. Okay, two different incarnations of black coming. Let's go with these smaller wools. Do I want smaller wools? Do I want large and small again? This is a rather big scene, so I think we could fit both in there. Okay, let's go with the Marvy Black. Okay, for my image, and all of these two running back here. Okay. And too small. Alright. This is kind of universal. I think this is the first block that I used with the tack and peel. Alright. And these will be the larger ones right here. That. Okay. VersaFine. Okay. Hopefully that looks somewhat dramatic in terms of the imagery in there. Okay. Zoom out and take a look here. Fine-tuning adjustments, okay? Let's go with a little bit more. Let's go back to that green again. Boy, this paper is wet. Okay, this is the light green that I used, but I was using it in just re-inker form. Let me go with a little bit more. Okay, I did re-ink this pad up here, so. Okay, I'm going to be careful not to bring this down into those pigment ink trees, the versifying trees. I want it brighter up here. Now the spraying will make things brighter, but I'm going to actually bring some of this into that white area. Kind of the star of the scene, you know, the subjects, you know, that probably are the anchoring point of the scene are those wolves. Any kind of living thing or object, you know, man-made cabin or something like that, or person or animal, they tend to be the kind of the landing point visually, but these curtains right here play a pretty significant role in terms of the focal points of this piece. So I really want to make them kind of stand out nice and bright, like that. And I still need to spray this though, so it should get very bright again through that usage. Okay, I need to be careful down here. These images are a little bit wet still, so okay. I need to be mindful of the ones that are pigment ink over dye base. Dye over dye, you can go over that, no problem. It is a little bit wet though. Okay. One of the things that I was thinking about doing, I haven't done that in a kind of a northern light type of thing. I don't think I've used my kind of splatter brush technique over the top of it, especially on a large format like this. I'm not sure. Splatter painting it. I don't think I'd want to do that here. I think it looked too busy. It's already very somewhat, well, it's already a pretty busy scene. Okay, let's do some other types of touches to this. Let me grab that cosmetic brush here, and let's do some kind of fine-tuned shading on here. Let's grab my black Marvy pad, and this kind of adds a nice kind of light application of ink down here. I want to add some additional shadows kind of right around where I started doing that with the color box stylus tool, but I'll add a little bit more with this. Let's get down here in the corner, four corners of the scene. Add a little more shadow around that wolf. Always turn your paper at an angle and position that's going to be the most conducive for a nice ergonomic application of media. Especially with this type of repetition right here. If you're kind of out of position, your shoulder's probably going to get tired, or some area of your hand, but kind of be just conscientious of that, and keep your kind of body in alignment in the most comfortable position that you can find. And try not to tense up when doing this too. Just keep your shoulder kind of nice and loose. I found that doing this type of thing, I really had to think about that so that I'm not absorbing any of the kind of repetitive tension anywhere. That my hand's very loose and whatnot. I just have this, I'm holding this very loose. Okay, I think that looks pretty good in terms of the shading going on in here. Maybe I can make this background a little bit darker in some areas to bring more attention to the wolves, although the wolves don't need any help, but just in terms of lighting, we'll kind of make the lighting a little bit more, a little bit darker. Okay, let's incorporate this bush into it a little bit more. A little bit of shadow down here. All right. Wow, that's a lot of coloring. That is one thickly colored piece for sure. Isn't that insane? Okay. My gosh, look at that. I use the back of this. I'm glad I had some 11 by 17, just blotter paper. Okay. We have this green colored scheme. We can certainly have those colors in gel pen forms. So, what I'll do, and try to be very careful about it, is to add some additional touches. Now, in skies, northern lights, especially with photography at time exposure shots and whatnot, you can get stars within this space showing. So this is a Uniball Signo green. Let me see if it even shows up. I might be lying. This green is fairly light, but when I put it over here, it's fairly translucent, so I can't see it too much. Okay, so let's try this one right here. This one's a Uniball Signo. It looks like a turquoise or something. Okay, that one really stands out. Okay. We need to really kind of zoom in for these ones, this application. I'm using this green so that it's not quite so obvious. And then we will go with some white. Maybe kind of stand out more. This is what we're getting right here. Kind of real subtle stars. Maybe they're more distant ones or something like that, or whatnot. I wouldn't say the sky is boring by any means, but there are some areas where, you know, I mean, it does get to be a little bit monotonous, so doing things like this, adding kind of this little element like this kind of, it can kind of reintroduce or introduce an element of light into that space, and doing so in a textural form of a dot. And it just kind of adds that, you know, sometimes an element that was just missing. Okay, let's take a look and see what that looks like. Right around in here. See, I kind of take it all the way down in here. You see those little dots down there? Come around. That. See, they're right over there. It's kind of subtle. Right down in here. Okay, now I really have to be careful about those wolves and where I've added that pigment ink. Okay, this is not very light of a color, but if I add it over areas that are darker, it does stand out lighter, right? By contrast. So I'm going in here, and I can add in. I usually try to find an area that it's about the same value of it, where it doesn't show up as, you know, as I apply it, but then I'll kind of work it into my darker areas and have it kind of show. And by contrast, I guess you can work it into a light area too, where it shows by, you know, being darker. See, there's some rocks in there that got kind of dark because I, you know, can only control the tiny, you know, the bigger tip of a applicator so much, but this is a way to go back in, like on the top sides of those rocks I can make them lighter with the use of a little gel pen application. Okay, that is that. That was kind of a, what, turquoise color? Alright, let me dip into some of my shuttle art gel pens. Like, man, this one, can't tell from the cap which ones are kind of glitter. I guess you could do a glitter application. I don't know if I want that though. Okay, this is that color kind of matches that, doesn't it? So you can kind of go multi-tone with this for sure. And it's kind of like you're just utilizing the color scheme that you've established in the form of dye-based inks. I mean, this whole scene can be done if you're doing it on like a different paper, maybe with, you know, you take that airbrush kind of option of the like Copic marker system. That would be really cool to do, the, you know, the airbrushed kind of applications of this type of ink. What these represent, I don't know. This is like a kind of a shimmery little texture on the surface. Okay, my my memory card filled up, but I forgot to remove the video, my last video from the card, so I just erased all that. So, nevertheless, I should get moving along with this one. Okay, now the Shuttle Art Pen's colors are, they're not quite as opaque as the Uniball Signo inks, okay, gel inks. So the colors underneath are going to show through this. So this is kind of that color on a white piece of paper, but it's going to look quite a bit darker over the top of you know, the green hues from all my dye-based inks that have been applied in here. So I need to take that into consideration when applying these. In other words, something that, you know, looks whatever value when it dries, and especially when I spray it, it'll look darker. So I can go a little bit lighter with these gel pen inks than I might, were it not for that kind of aspect of the darkening. Okay. I didn't know how much of the gel pens I was going to use. I figured, this video is long enough, but I thought, well, we've come this far, we might as well just go all the way with this. Okay. Alright, here's my white pen. I've retained some of the white of the paper still, so using kind of these white highlights still works. Sometimes when if you don't have any white of the paper left and you're doing kind of white highlights, you're saying that, you know, there's white light in there reflecting off of something, reflecting back that white. You know, if the light isn't white still a little bit, then this kind of doesn't really make sense. You can go with, you know, one of the colored gels or something like that if you want to, but the white might stand out kind of strange. Okay, so on the tops of some of these rocks, you know, we can kind of reintroduce, you know, a little bit of a white highlight on some of these. You can come into your area down here and add a little bit of a texture to the ground. I kind of come into my lighter areas and add a few dots. Hopefully makes it kind of like shimmer, or at least reflect a little bit of that light that's being cast by our northern lights. So if I'm kind of adding shading at the base of some rocks, on the tops of the rocks I can add a little bit of highlighting, right? Or it could be, you know, some snow on the tops of some rocks or something of that sort. Be it whatever it might be, it does add some contrast and texture back into the scene, though, too. Or even if it's not bringing it back, it's kind of introducing it to that area. It's like that down in that area down below, like on the top sides of, you know, certain areas, certain objects, I should say. Okay, the other stars up here, it's not different colors of them, different sizes. It doesn't look like kind of like deeper space within that space by doing, you know, changing your values. Now, I didn't use any white up here. Let's add a few white ones up here and see how, those ones really kind of stand out. So maybe these stars are larger stars or closer to us or whatnot. Younger stars. You can do snowfall in here too, doing like some white touches over the tops of some trees. So it doesn't have to just be stars. But this white really stands out, doesn't it? So it does show up in kind of these lighter green areas where the light green dot wouldn't show up because it's the same value as the background. Maybe that's Orion's belt there or something, I don't know. Come out here. Orion's sword, not really, but it's a little bit off, but you can kind of work in certain constellations into your scenes if you know what they look like, or you can just look them up on the internet. But there we go. See, doesn't that look fun up there? It looks like a little bit of deeper space now, right? You probably have some gel pens in your tool, your repertoire. Maybe I'll put a few little touches of snow or just reflective light on a couple of these branches or some of these trees if I want. Okay, let me see. Let me zoom in like this. Doesn't really show up on this tree because it's against something that's so light, so I have to kind of put, if I'm going to apply this to anything, I need to apply it on some areas where there's going to be some contrast against this white dot application. Trick is kind of adding a little bit more into the areas that are light and a little bit less in the areas that are really dark, otherwise it kind of stands out too much by contrast. Okay, so like in other words, here's this tree down here, and in the darkness I'll just put a few dots, and kind of as it moves up into the light I can add a few more and it doesn't stand out so much. You can also use like green, highlights down here or something, or the shuttle art pen is more translucent too, like I was mentioning. Okay, so now that kind of a few dots makes that really stand out against the background, doesn't it? Doesn't it look a little bit more three-dimensional this way? In just a very subtle way. And just a few dots on it can make it stand out from the background like that. See, like that. We're going to zoom out. Okay. This one kind of gets a little bit obscured in here. You can put a few little highlights on it, like so. Kind of makes it stand out just a touch. this paper is 10 point. I wish it was 12 point where it's not really bowing too bad, but a little bit. Okay, let's see. All right. My gosh. Pigment ink applications. White pigment ink applications. Such a huge, surface here. Maybe I won't add too much. I don't want to add too much down here because that pigment ink right there. Pigment ink on pigment ink, it might look just like gray because it'll mix with the black one here, but okay. Let me try to get in. Remember those wools back there were stamped in the Marvy black. Okay, so I talk about this every time I do this, but when I'm doing this kind of misty type of effect, I want there to be kind of a dry brush aspect to this application, okay? Meaning when I do a couple taps, you can barely see it, right? Oh, sorry. Okay. See this right here? This is too much ink. It's leaving like blobs, okay? I'm going to tap some of it off using a light touch, okay? See this very light touch right there? That's what you want. You want a kind of a gradual way. Now if I go tap and, tap it hard, it's going to squeeze out and transfer more ink off my tip like that. But just in general, you want to do it where it's very little, okay, like that. And that way you have a lot of control over the amount of ink that's being applied, okay? So let's see what these two wools are they're almost stacked on top of one. One's darker than the other one, so, and I don't think people think that that's giving a piggyback ride to that, but let's just kind of separate them a little bit in terms of distance. So I'll put this guy in a little bit of a mist or whatnot, so he's a little bit more farther back in the composition distance-wise, like so. So yeah, he's kind of a transitioning values like that. Okay, we can put a little mist. It's where light meets dark is where you kind of apply this. Where dark meets dark, it's, something like this is going to stand out too much, so it doesn't look right, okay? See this right in here? See that rock right back? Let me zoom out a little bit, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. I mean, getting in trouble in terms of when I start doing this, I start working like off, the page or something like that, off screen. Okay. So kind of just adding this mist down here. It's kind of illuminated fog or whatnot. It just adds a textural change to an otherwise very crisp, sharp scene or surface area. So then it just kind of adds that little element of softness where light meets dark. Here, light meets dark right here. So let's put a little bit of a like mist or fog up on that ridge line right there. Okay, right around here too. Now I'm going a little bit lighter with this application too, because when I spray it, some of my pigment ink applications will kind of fade out, and plus, even if I don't spray it, pigment ink dries darker than what it looks like when it's been freshly applied, so I apply a little bit more than I think looks ideal. Can you see this tree in the distance right here? Let's create a little bit more separation, okay? Let's vary it a little bit. Maybe some of it's catching some of the light, and some kind of in a bank of fog, or that mist back there is kind of breaking up the image, and it's like a kind of lighter to us. Okay, so I get that. Let's take a look at some of these stars up here. Like some of my larger stars, where I've drawn a little circle that's kind of illuminate them a little bit. Maybe make some of the larger ones a little bit more like they're glowing. Okay, I put a little bit too much. My ink on my applicator is a little bit smudgy, so I just kind of wipe this off and it comes right off. So they see that little glow there. Let me get this a little bit more even on my tip right here. And here's another star that's a little bit bigger. I just kind of pick and choose, which ones I want a little bit brighter. Okay, so see these ones that are kind of glowing up here? It's kind of nice, they kind of glow, and I don't know if they twinkle. I could put some glitter on it or something like that. But with a gel pen, but that's kind of fun. There's a nice little touch right there. See that little glowing star? It changes the texture up in that sky area in that small section, which gives the overall a little bit more kind of a richness to it. Okay, let's take a look at this scene here. I think I'm just about done, if not done. I don't know of any other types of things, metallic gel pens, glitter gel pens, just like for a star here or there might be kind of cool. We have the Wink of Stella pen, maybe I can do a little shimmer down here or something of that sort. So there's still little things you can do like that that can kind of embellish what you have. Speaking of that Wink of Stella, these are those kind of glitter brush pens. This one's clear. This is the one everyone really liked at the Arizona show, because you can kind of add it to any color and get glitter. I did get the silver and gold too, because I really like metallics. But now I don't know if you're going to be able to see this at all. Okay, but you can just, I'll add a little bit down here into the lighter area. It's kind of putting the gel pen dots back into solution, but that's fine. Put a little bit up on this ridge. Illuminated ridge line. Let me see if I can see that here. Yeah, I can kind of see it, but it's subtle though. See, if someone got your card like that, they can only kind of see it if it kind of captures that light. It's right in here. It's very, I don't know, it's there, but I don't know if you can see that. It's I didn't use too much of it. I didn't want too much. Plus, I didn't want to go into those walls right there. But I don't know. It's a subtle little addition. But here's all my area right here. I might need to change my exposure, my camera, but let me go and spray this, and we'll see if this area up here becomes much more kind of deep and saturated and vibrant. Okay? Okay. Freshly sprayed. I sprayed it with a Krylon UV resistant clear. And it's an acrylic spray, some kind of UV protectant, but look how vibrant that is, especially up in the sky area. Makes it extra glossy, of course. Get this kind of bent the correct way. There we go. All right, let me kind of counter bend some of this here. Okay, here we go. Okay, but see that those deep saturations up there? And even down here too. This area up here in the trees. I give it a pretty thick coating quickly. Sometimes I go with thinner coats and I just put on more, but I wanted to get this kind of over and done with. But I thought I would lose a little bit more of that pigment ink up there too, but it remained pretty steadfast up there, so still have that glowing area. It's kind of like when you spray some of these things, sometimes it, like pastels or chalks, if you've ever kind of spray sealed those or put a spray fixative on them, sometimes you know that you lose a lot of the kind of more delicate areas where you've applied lighter tones over the tops of darker tones with that kind of type of medium, but and that same thing happens here sometimes with your pigment inks and whatnot that have been applied over kind of darker areas. They just kind of disappear, but it retains, you know, it pretty decently. And if that happens, you can always kind of reapply your pigment inks right over the top of this. But I think I'm done here. I think that, you know, that's a fairly dramatic type of scenario here with your northern lights, and you have your silhouette wolves kind of running down there, and I don't know, the pack under the lights or something like that, or something of that sort. So hope you enjoyed the scene, hope you like it, and hope you like the entire technique and look of that type of aurora borealis. You can do it in all kinds of different color schemes, but the green ones and the emerald greens, just in general, not just for aurora borealises, but I really like that kind of glowing, kind of greenish tinge, you know, emerald type of color scheme in my scenes, be it for whatever reason. So the Northern Lights kind of gives me an excuse to really use those types of colors in combination for a kind of a specific purpose. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and if you've sat through the entire thing, thanks for bearing with me on such a large kind of a time-consuming you know, format here in the full shade size.